Hello, everyone. This is episode 3 of Indie2Indie, currently interviewing developers of the shorter games with worse graphics bundle. And I am here today with...
Fabian Fischer.
Okay. And you are contributing Spacewalk Empire to the bundle.
Yes, exactly.
Great.
One of the games I made on my own in my
Mhm.
spare time, basically.
Cool. So about how long have you been making games? Because I've seen that your itch page actually has a few different games on it.
Yeah, the itch page isn't that old.
Mhm.
I mean, the first thing I can remember is I made some RPG Maker things like back in 2000, like when
Mhm.
RPG Maker 2000 came out. I did some pretty generic RPG adventure stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and then actually kind of lost track of making games a little bit. I was more into making music and composing and playing in a band and stuff. And then I guess when it got to yeah, taking life more seriously, more or less.
Mhm.
And I studied computer science. I got back into it and started making games again. Like that was 2010, 11, but
Mhm.
nothing too serious at first. And it became more and more serious during that time when I also learned more about game design and stuff. And then actually got a game design job right after my master's. And yeah, basically been working as a full-time game designer since then. And the last 3-4 years also started with making my own side stuff again in Unity and recently Pico 8.
Mhm.
So yeah, just using the awesome engines we have today that help you with basically making everything on your own if you want to, and
Mhm.
trying out experimenting, even if you're not like a trained programmer originally.
Mm. Yeah, there's definitely a lot more variety in game engine and also more
Yeah,
accessibility to people who either don't know how to code or don't have the time to spend on figuring out how to code everything.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool. How did you get into making games? I guess it's really you were into computer science and that was just a...
Yeah, I mean, I was into games basically always.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my father introduced me to like games at a very young age. Like, we had like a C64 and an Amiga and things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing I remember most was King's Bounty, which was like a kind of a predecessor to Heroes of Might and Magic.
Okay.
And yeah, he played that a lot with me when I was a kid, and it started back then. Basically, I would say that I got into games and I never really left.
Mm-hmm.
And with making games, I mean, I already talked about it a little bit. I'd say it got serious when I um, like discovered this discipline of game design that's kind of nebulous when you're not working on games.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, okay, there's art, there's coding, that's the obvious stuff, and but there's also this rule set crafting, basically, that's one part of game design where you come up with systems and decide how they should interact, and that doesn't even have to directly do with what you're seeing on the screen, or it doesn't even have to be digital. It can be board games as well.
Mm-hmm.
And this discipline of game design really fascinated me, and I found some blogs by Keith Bergen, Soren Johnson, Raf Costa,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, just got into that rabbit hole, and I'm still in it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, game design's that sort of thing where it doesn't there's no true end. Like there's always something
Yeah,
more to learn to it. And it is such a nebulous topic.
yeah.
Um, so why would you say you make games?
Um,
Like if anything, why this?
I would say I think there's a lot of unexplored potential there, and I think you really, even as an individual or a very small team, you have a chance to really make a difference. Because, like, I mean, other media are like way more mature, like music or movies or something, and you probably, like, if you don't get really deep into it or have some good connections to other folks, then it's really hard to get to a point where, like, okay, I can make something now that's valuable to people and is something new and explores some new territory in this art form, basically. But I think in games it's very much possible, and there's I mean, there are huge games, of course, like the whole AAA industry, but it's pretty risk averse and focused on good feeling, like feel good gameplay and marketability and the visuals, audio visuals. And there's this whole aspect of interaction design, basically, whether it's just systemic, like some new kinds of mechanics that you've never seen, or whether it's transporting a narrative through interaction, that I think is still pretty unexplored. Like, that's not just trying to be a movie with some gameplay on the side, but that's actually like you feel the narrative, like, for example, Journey or Edith Finch recently was a favorite of mine that did this very well. And yeah, I think there's, even though the medium of games is huge, there's still a lot of potential in small niches and areas to explore. And yeah, that's what I'm trying to do also.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing I find very interesting about games is the fact that because games have mechanics, as opposed to many things like books or movies, where it's something that you perceive, you're a part of it for sure, but not in the same way that you're a part of playing a video game. And so they can tie mechanics into the sort of story or feeling that they're trying to go for. So with games like Journey and Edith Finch, the desolation and wandering around and just trying to find where you're trying to go really does help to build that atmosphere. So yeah, that is something that games are very good at and is a very interesting space to be in.
Yeah.
So would you say you consider this a job or more of a hobby?
I mean, I would have to say both because it's like de facto it is my job. It's been my job for like 6 years now, almost. And it's also a hobby when I'm just making my own side stuff. Or I also, with a friend of mine, I founded a small board game company a few years ago. And we're now also, with the help of some German government funding, we're working on a digital version of that board game. And that's all basically hobby stuff, I would say. I mean, we made enough money on Kickstarter to fund ourselves, basically, like to print the game and print some expansions, but we're not like earning money with it. So it's all very focused on like creating this passion project of ours and bringing it to life and seeing people play it. And it's like the money is not really, like, we didn't jump into it and left our day jobs for it. So it's
no mortgaging of houses or anything.
Yeah, really. No, we're really aware of what it is, and we want it to be that thing exactly, and we don't want to compromise for the sake of making this our job or something.
Right. So let's actually talk a bit about your game in the bundle, Spacewalk Empire. So this was a solo project? Was it just you? Did you have any testers or anything?
Yeah, I had like a couple of testers among my friends, but I didn't run a open beta or something. I basically just had them play it and see if it feels good, find some bugs. But other than that, it was just me designing and coding. And I used art by Kenny.nl, which is like an awesome collection of assets if you quickly want to experiment with something or make a prototype. And I was trying to make a top-down space game, and he had top-down space assets, so I used those. Other than that, it was mostly just me.
Great. So what engine did you use for this game, and how come?
I made it in Unity, and I made it in Unity because I learned Unity in the past few years, and so I guess the question is actually, why did I learn Unity and not something else? It's just so widely used, and there are so many resources and tutorials. It's just pretty easy to get into, I think. And also, like, I'm not really interested in making something AAA-ish or even do a lot with fancy 3D graphics. So that was like the one thing everyone told me, like, Unreal Engine is better for, and I'm like, don't really care. So I went with Unity, and I've just been using the 2D standard setup of it since then.
Right. Unity has definitely opened up a lot of avenues for people, and it's slowly becoming easier and easier to use, which is very good.
And even a lot of big games use it now. So.
Yes, yeah. For all the smack talk that it has gotten for, asset flip games and whatnot, the fact of the matter is that having the asset store for people to be able to prototype things so quickly has been a great boon. So why did you make this game? What about a top-down space sort of RTS but turn-based game was it that made you want to make this? Because it is a little unusual sort of mechanic.
Yeah, so that was like the original idea, to make something real time but not real time. Like, I'm generally a fan of turn-based games. Like, I like their deliberateness and the planning, and that everything is discrete. Like, it doesn't matter if you do something a fraction of a second earlier or later, or you don't have to be pixel perfect, but you have these discrete decision points that you're going through and building your strategy on. What I don't like, or what I question, let's say, is when when turn-based games give you unlimited time to think, because then it seems like, okay, the optimal strategy now is to think forever and calculate through everything. And it becomes this, there once was this article, the burden of optimal play, where you consciously have to remind yourself to not think forever and actually play more loose and quick, but you have to do it yourself. And some people are better at that, and some people play too quickly. Some people think forever and never get a turn done. It becomes this the player needs to design their own time system, more or less.
Right.
So a typical solution to this is to introduce a turn timer, which works. Especially multiplayer games also makes sense. But it always feels kind of extrinsic to the rest of the game, like a little bit tacked on when you have this timer that goes on in real world time, but it's not really connected to the rest of the game. It's just a number of seconds that ticks down. So then the other solution is to make it real time, so that the natural constraint is just what happens in the game, and it happens without you clicking next turn. It just happens all the time, so you have to play quicker. But then most games then lose this discreteness that I liked, because you have to be very precise on where you click, or have fast reflexes on reacting to things. And so I was thinking about combining both worlds, basically. And so Spacewalk Empire has this tick-based real-time system where basically the turns play out not super fast, but also compared to a traditional turn-based game, it is fast. So it's like a slow RTS or a quick turn-based game, if you want. And yeah, I try to make it have this discreteness and planning of turn-based games, but also force you to think on your feet and make decisions quickly and in the flow of how things interact in the game, and not because some timer ticks down somewhere in the corner or something.
Yeah, that was something I actually haven't thought about, was the fact that optimal play would, for turn-based games, would involve really just sitting there and thinking for so long. And I wonder if that's partly the reason that things like ATB gauges in like Final Fantasy VII or something became such a popular method of play for RPGs. I have not thought about that, so I'm going to have to probably do research later today on that, because that's more my market, and that's very interesting to me. So I have a question that's, why did you go with this particular aesthetic? But it sounds to me like it's what Kenny had available in terms of top-down assets.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I had this rough idea that a space theme could make sense for the game, and that you have these harvesters that harvest resources, and some spaceships that fight like alien spaceships or whatever. And
then you set up colonies. And
yeah, then you have the astronauts that set up colonies, and you can build little turrets, laser turrets. And yeah, I had that basic idea, and then the assets just happened to fit mostly. Like, I think there was one or two that I tweaked a bit. I added like a laser cannon on top of the tower thing, but yeah, they were mostly just usable out the gate.
What did you do for sound for the game? Because does it have music? Because I didn't hear any, but does it have?
No, it has like an ambience track going in the background. That was by Lucas Calvo, I think.
Gotcha.
It's just from Open Game Art or something. And yeah, other than that, sound effects, I think also.
Yeah.
Mostly from Kenny.
Okay.
He also has a lot of sound collections. Yeah, it's just, I mean, in terms of sounds, I'm really, like, this was all about exploring this mechanics idea. So I just wanted the sound effects to support the mechanics, so that you like get better feedback on what's happening. Yeah, didn't really like have my own sounds created or something.
Yeah, that's at least for me, whenever I'm doing game testing, I pretty much always have the game muted anyway, just because I'm like, I have to listen to hours and hours and hours of this anyway. Like, for me, no matter what, it's going to get old, so I need to make sure, like, for my important play tests, that it sounds a bit more fresh to me. But also, I make games where, you know, the sound is absolutely not the reason that you're there for. It's not like I'm making rhythm games or anything.
Yeah.
So about how long did this game take to make?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I didn't track hours or something.
Right. But I mean, like estimates, like, oh, it took like about 10 hours a week for a year or whatever.
Yeah, I don't even know if it was 10 hours a week. It was like, I would say 4 months on and off in my spare time, like in the evenings or sometimes on the weekend. Like maybe on average 10 hours, sometimes more, sometimes less, for 4 months. Yeah.
It's a healthy way to make a game, you know, no crunch involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like when you're doing a full-time job and then do this on the side.
Yeah,
It's
there's only so much energy
yeah.
that you can also bring to it. Would you say you learned anything from making this? Whether it's a thing about design or just something personal that you like about making games, or
Yeah, I mean, I would like from a technical standpoint, I would say I learned to handle Unity better and like write better code in general. Like that's also part of the reason why I'm making these small games since a few years now. Is to practice my coding skills basically, and not lose connection to that. Like I obviously did some coding during my studies, but I was never really the coder person, and more like the design and systems design, and like coming up with blueprints for stuff and how stuff should be connected. So the coding I did more out of necessity, and so yeah, I'm trying to keep in touch with that and make it a bit more natural. And Unity actually also helps there really, because you can get more or less straight to the gameplay code stuff, which is what interests me, which is very close to the systems design part. And you don't have to deal with a lot of low-level setting up stuff, which is a bit too far removed from the actual gameplay for my taste.
right? Okay. Would you say you're happy with the game? Like, all in all things, like the amount of time that you spent on it, what ended up becoming the game?
In general, I'd say yes. I think it's probably one of my best solo games I've made. I think it does what it set out to do. So it explores this real-time turn-based weird hybrid niche space pretty well, I think. And it shows that there's something there that's not really being explored by many games. Like I think there was a Zachtronics game, Ironclad Tactics, I think. It's like a card game that also has real-time elements. A few, like, or even 8-7 years ago, I don't know. And like there's not much else in that space, I think. And but there's a lot that could be done. And I think even Spacewalk Empire, I have like a list of ideas that you could add on top or improve, but I left it in this prototypey experimental version because it works well enough. It's a complete thing. The game loop is there. It even has this single player ladder where the game gets harder if you win consecutively. And I think it's more or less a demonstration of that there could be something in this space and it should be explored further, and I'll probably return to it at some point in the future.
All right. So you have multiple games on your itch page, 6 if I remember correct. How would you describe the games that you make? Is there a general theme, or do you just do what strikes you as interesting at the time?
So most of them, like in terms of genre, I would say they're strategy games. Like there's some more action-y stuff, but it usually has some core that's centered around making decisions. So it's more strategy-ish, even if it's action-based. other than that, I think I always try to do something that hasn't been done. Like I made this, like the first Unity thing I made, which was partially to learn Unity, but also I wanted to do something that not everyone does. So I made a top-down arena action game, which sounds very, normal. But then I said, okay, you can't shoot. You can't do anything but move around, and stuff only happens when you pick up items in the arena. And so you always have to, it's completely focused around movement and dodging enemies and triggering items in the right moment, but you have no control where they spawn. So it's a more indirect thing than your typical twin stick shooter or something. And like that's basically my theme. The theme of my games is that they do something that hasn't been done really, or that even if it's a very specific niche like this turn-based real-time combination, I'm just trying to explore some design space where I don't find really any good examples that have done it before.
All right. Do you have a favorite game that you've made?
So in terms of the solo games I've made, it's probably Spacewalk Empire. Close call would be with I made a mobile card game called Lane Stormers, which is like a lane-based card game, solo card game, where you basically decide in which lane you put your things, and then they go fight against monsters. So it's I guess it's pretty Clash Royale like, but single player and more asymmetric. So you're fighting hordes of monsters instead of another player.
Gotcha.
In terms of other games, I mentioned this board game company that I founded with a friend, and we made a game called Crimson Company, which is also very near and dear to my heart. And I would say is like probably the best game I worked on from its inception to the end. I mean, also because we really developed it a lot. Like even after the design was done, we had art done professionally, and now we ran multiple Kickstarters for expansions to the game. So it's a pretty well-developed game, and it also started in this prototypey experimentation state, and it really, like, from then on, it took like, that was like 20% of the time to get there, and then 80% of the time it took just to develop it into a thing that you could make people be interested in, basically. That they don't just say, oh, it's a cool experiment, but that's it. But that they actually say, okay, I will support this, I will buy into the Kickstarter and everything. And that's like, yeah. So it's very polished and well-rounded, I would say.
Yeah. I had that with one of my games where I made a prototype that actually got somewhat popular. But it was a lot of people who played it and were very vocal about not liking it. So a lot of the work was just making something that people would actually like. Because the concept of it was just, it wasn't meant to be an enjoyable game. So I was like, okay, well, now I have to figure out how to make this enjoyable, because it caught people's attention enough to yell at me about it, and that means people were at least interested in the screenshots, so I know I have at least something here. So yeah, I can understand sometimes a lot of making the game isn't so focused on actually making it, but making it something that people will want to play and experience.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of, it's not really, like, there's no truth there, like you should do the thing that people like, or you should do the thing that you think it should be. because like maybe some games aren't meant to be enjoyable. Maybe they are supposed to convey some other message or do something like that you intended them to do. But then people don't play them, and if a game isn't played, what is it really? Like, I guess you can make it for yourself, but you kind of usually you want to evoke something with your game, so that there's like a balance to be struck between like making something accessible and marketable, and then also making it like an expression of what you want to tell the world, or the world of games at least.
Yeah, financial viability versus artistic expression.
Yeah, pretty much.
So let's say you had an infinite amount of time, an infinite number of people that you could call upon, you know, whatever sorts and variety of resources that you needed, infinite money. What game would you make with access to those sorts of resources?
Yeah, so that is an interesting question. Like, I think in the past I probably would have had a clear answer there, but the more I'm inside of making games, the less I think you can answer this question. Like, I would probably say I'll just continue to make experiments, or I guess put together small teams that do these, like, explore these design spaces that aren't explored yet. And when you find something where there's a lot of potential there, then you can basically scale that up and make that into a full-fledged marketable thing, maybe. But in general, I would say you don't really know. Like, you can of course say, if I have infinite money, I make some AAA game, but do I really want that? I already have infinite money, so I would rather explore some new space and basically do what I'm now doing when I'm making a solo game, but maybe with a small team, and then go from there and just see what's worth digging deeper into and exploring further.
What would you say you like about making games?
Yeah, so in general, the whole systems design aspect that I mentioned, where you're like, there's a lot of complexity there, like how does the system interact with itself, the different elements of the system, but then also how do they interact with the player, or the player with them. And if there are multiple players, then they interact between each other. And it's like, that's like the core fascination, I would say, for me, like this emergent complexity topic, basically, where you never really know. Like, you might have an idea in your head of how a game works, or that it might work well, but when you have people play it, it's always a completely different story. And even when you play it yourself, like, that's one fascinating aspect, is when you make a game and it gets to a certain point of complexity, and then you're putting yourself into the shoes of a player, and you're like discovering how would I play this game well when I want to do well in the game. And then you really get like a new perspective on your design. Like, you can lay out your thoughts and everything perfectly fine, but then it's always a different feeling when you actually play it, and it has a complete game loop that you can go through, and you basically rethink everything from a new perspective. And that's like, could mean you just end the project because it doesn't work. It also could be this magical thing where you're like, hey, this is actually something that's fun, or that's interesting enough to continue working on it. And then you take these new ideas that you get from the player perspective and tweak it further. And that's really, the nitty-gritty of game design, I guess.
Is there anything that you really just don't enjoy about making games?
Yeah, I mean, I could say everything outside of that. Like, of course, it would be great if that was it, but there's a lot of stuff around it that you have to get going. Like, you have to program the game, you have to, if you want some people to see it, you have this big struggle for visibility all the time. You have to look for assets that you can work with. If Kenny doesn't have everything you need right there. So yeah, I guess that's all something that I do because it has to be done. But ideally I would just pour my designs into a playable thing and test it immediately. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I mean I like the aspect of working on a game in terms of improving the design and testing the design with people and with myself and like iterating on the gameplay parts. But I'm not really into developing it, like maintaining it, bug fixing, stuff like that. That all comes with it automatically when you're making something that's a little bit more complex. But yeah, I could do without that.
So is there something that you think that we will all have to incorporate at some point into our games? Because I know like voice acting is a popular thing right now, VR is a popular thing right now. Is there anything that you think that all games are eventually also going to have to incorporate?
I mean, I wouldn't say, I would never say have to, because I mean, there's so many different types of games. Like there are even audio only games without graphics, and there's so many things you can do. So I don't think all games have to do something. I mean, the one thing I would say all games have to do is incorporate interactivity somehow, because that's what makes them games. And my hope would be that this becomes more ingrained in all, even big studios who make games, and like in the general public, like that they sometimes I have the feeling when you read like in a normal newspaper about games, they are more like, oh, this is this new type of movie thing where you're like the main actor and that's the thing that games do. But like there's really more to it than that. And I would hope that the further the medium develops, that it becomes more aware of this and like focuses on what makes it different from other media, and not so much on how it can take the strengths of other media and then also put a little bit of game on the side, and that's it. Like, yeah, I would say that's like the core. Whether you're using interactivity for mechanical purposes or narrative purposes that I mentioned before, I think, yeah, that's the one thing you have to incorporate.
Is there something that you think indie games and studios are able to do better than AAA games and studios?
Yeah, so I definitely would say experimentation. Like when you're a AAA studio, you basically have to be risk averse and you have to do something that works already and worked in other games before. And you don't really have a lot of, like, you can do some I guess some side thing in your game, like the new Watch Dogs game where you can play as anyone and that's their new thing. But the core of it is still like a third-person action game, like most other AAA games. And when you're indie, I mean, it depends a bit on if you're in it for the money, I guess. But most indies can't be in it for the money, or if they can, they already made something they wanted to make and it was successful, so they can just continue making their own spin on things. And so in general, I would say, I mean, solo indies anyway, but also indie studios are way more open in terms of the exploring design spaces that haven't been used so much, and just making something and seeing if it works, as opposed to you have to make something that definitely works and relies on what's already out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of that, simply because there really is just so much that, indies are able to do in this space simply because we're not beholden to anybody,
Yeah.
And sometimes AAA games manage to pull that off. I mean, if you look at original Borderlands, originally it was just going to be like some fairly typical shooting game at its core, and then somebody was in a side room working on like this new way to do graphics for the game. And then they're like, oh, we actually could incorporate this, and so they did. And that's why it has like its aesthetic cell shading, and that really fed into, well, okay, well now what if we actually built a story around this, because this works for a really gritty but also comic book feel.
Yeah.
And so then they just got weird from there, and then that's why Borderlands is what it is today. Because otherwise, it's a shooting game with RPG mechanics, which many things have already done. So yeah, sometimes if when there's room for experimentation, that's when things can become really interesting and cool. And there's just not as much space for that in the AAA space.
Yeah.
For our final really games-related question here, do you have any advice for people who want to get into making games? As advice is very much a mileage may vary thing. Still, what would you say you have, if any?
So in general, I would say don't expect to earn a living off of games. Like try to get a job, maybe in games. It can be in games, but just making your own stuff and living off of that is like insanely difficult, and only very few people manage to do that. And so yeah, that's like the practical advice. The other thing is, I would say, find like some discipline you're really passionate about, like whether it's art or programming or game design or making sounds or music, and like really not just like make stuff, of course, but not just only make stuff, but also try to learn about the theory behind it and the history of it, and like try to build a lot of knowledge around that aspect, so that you can really have all this knowledge in your toolkit basically when you're making things in the future. And I think it really helps if you look at what's been done and why, and there are a lot of resources out there about pretty much any topic, where you can read up on it in books or on blogs, and just understand why things are the way they are, and not just copy some other game that you like. I mean, that's also a good starting point, but then I think you should try to learn more about how that came to be, and not just copy it because it's cool or you like it.
All right. So I have an ending survey for everyone to be able to get to know you better. It's a modified version of Marcel Proust's questionnaire that was eventually modified by another person, which eventually was like the one that they do for inside the actor studio. So I just have some. This is all my random questions at once, basically.
Tough questions.
Yes, very tough. Some people have difficulties with these. I do, to clarify for everybody that's watching, I do send everybody the questions in advance, and everybody does get the opportunity to veto any questions. And I have had people veto these, so what would you say is your favorite virtue?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of lists of what virtues are, and
Whatever
I
it means to you.
went ahead a bit and looked through those, and I would say truthfulness really spoke to me. Like, on the one hand, in terms of being honest and open about things, like I really don't like when people get shady and do politics and stuff in the background and try to outmaneuver you or others. So I really respect openness and honesty, but also truthfulness in the sense of trying to find truth, even if you never really find it, like in disciplines like in game design or in music or in life in general. Like that's something I value when people try to make progress towards some kind of truth and try to learn new things and improve their understanding of how things work, and generally strive towards truth.
What would you say is one of the core, the core aspect of your personality?
Yeah, I would say it's like self-control, self-awareness, something like that. Like really, I'm always trying to be super aware of my surroundings. Like when there are other people around me, who are they? How do I have to phrase things so that they resonate with them or that they understand them? And I have a hard time like letting go and not thinking too much. So I'm always like trying to take everything into account, even like when I'm walking across the street and there's somebody else walking the street and our paths might cross, then I'm like 30 seconds before it happens, I'm already thinking about where I should be moving. Like in general, this whole self-awareness topic, I would say, is pretty core to myself.
What are your favorite qualities in another person?
Yeah, so I mean, I already mentioned honesty, I guess. I also really value reliability. Like when somebody says, I'll get back to you, I really value when they actually do that, because many people don't. Also, reasonability, I guess, that they question what happens around them and in the world and what other people say, and think about it and try to incorporate it into their own frame of mind, basically, and not just take it at face value. Or it also ties into this awareness thing a little bit that I talked about, where you're trying to understand what's happening around you and what's happening in the world, and generally, always try to improve your understanding of things.
What is it that you appreciate the most in your friends?
I guess all of the above. And
it is a pretty similar question.
Yeah, I would also add humor and like a wittiness, maybe cleverness. Just that you can laugh with them about things, like, but also have deep conversations with them about like really hidden aspects of things that you wouldn't see at first sight or something. I have a lot of friends that I talk to about game design, and we get like into these rabbit holes of thoughts sometimes. And I really appreciate when you can do that with somebody, and sometimes new thoughts spark from that, and then I can maybe go write an article or make a game from that.
What would you say is your main fault or flaw?
Yeah, so I talked a lot about reasoning and truth and like understanding things, and I would also, on the contrary, say that's like that's a fault of mine, that I sometimes condemn views that don't align with that very well. Like people make decisions that are not reasonable all the time. I also do that. And
It's part of being human.
it's exactly, yeah. And I just sometimes I have a rough time fitting that into my reasoning and my general system of thought, where I'm like, okay, why is this person doing this? I can't, it doesn't make sense. I can make sense of it, and then I'm like maybe dismissive of that a little bit, or yeah, something I'm trying to work on.
I feel like that kind of feeds back into the awareness thing, where you're trying to think ahead, and now something has come up that has changed your plans. And so I can understand why that would definitely be an issue for you.
Yeah.
What is your favorite way to spend time?
So yeah, when I get the chance, I always like to spend time with my wife, just talking, laughing, watching movies on Netflix, just spending time together. And when I'm alone, it's basically making games, thinking about games, writing about games, or yeah, hanging out in some game design communities, stuff like that. That's mostly what I spend my alone spare time with.
What is your idea of happiness?
Oh man, tough. That's a tough question.
I sent this ahead. You should be prepared.
Yeah, I thought a bit about it. And like the one thing it came down to was like making unforced progress at something, like whether it's building a really good relationship with somebody, or it's owning your skills, or learning about something new, or just doing some sports for your health. Something that you want to do, that nobody forces upon you, but that also makes you better, like in a way. Like I always try to find these things, and I think you can adapt them to many different areas in life. And yeah, that's generally, I'm happy when I have the feeling, okay, I can get somewhere and nobody's forcing me to go in a specific direction.
What is your idea of misery?
Yeah, I mean, that's also tough, because there's of course a lot of really bad misery in the world, and like I have a really privileged view on misery, because like I'm doing well. I have food on the table. I have an apartment to live in. So I thought about something that like drives me mad sometimes, but it's not that bad. But it's something I encounter on a daily basis, basically, and it really comes down to, for me, is a feeling of powerlessness, or like not having influence over something that influences you. And this can be small things, like, I don't know, it can be like waiting 10 seconds for a program to open up, and you're like, okay, this is wasting my time, I can't do anything about it, I just have to sit through this. And I mean, you encounter this everywhere, just in the administrative work of being a person on the planet, or when I founded this company with my friend, and we were going through these huge series of administrative tasks, and every year you have to do like your yearly report to the government, basically, and things like that really have to be done, but I can't really do anything about them, and I just have to deal with them somehow. And I mean, there's a more personal version of powerlessness, of course, but I would say that's the headline that sums up these things.
If not yourself, who would you like to be? You can pick living or dead, I don't care. It's more of a, if you could be anybody, who would you be? But I don't want you to answer yourself.
Yeah, makes sense. So I thought of people that do something I don't do, like that are in another creative field and have a lot of freedom to do what they pursue. And the one person I ended up with was Christopher Nolan, because he can like basically make the movies he wants to make and explore some weird ideas. And I would just like to experience what it's like to be him, like to make a movie. Like I can't make movies, so it would be super interesting to learn about this craft that I'm not able to do. And he's at a level where he has huge budgets, so he can do pretty much anything. But I think he also has this mindset of trying to explore new avenues and do weird things. And so I think that would be super interesting to be him, make one movie, and then switch back to myself.
Where would you like to live?
Yeah, that's also a tough question because I mean, you can't really know unless you live there already. I mean, I'm hearing good things about Canada in terms of living and also in terms of making games or running a game studio. And yeah, I guess that's the real world example. And the fictional, I don't know, maybe the world of Star Trek, where there's no poverty or conflict really on Earth.
Everything's just replicated.
Yeah, that could solve a lot of things, I guess.
Yeah, as somebody who lives in the United States, I've also been hearing good things about Canada, so I do understand that. What is your favorite color?
Yeah, it's black, if you count black as a color.
I will permit black. Many of the things I own are black. I have to legally permit black.
Okay.
Your favorite color or your favorite flower?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too knowledgeable about flowers, but something that came to my mind is there was a musical film in the 80s called Little Shop of Horrors, and it has this Venus flytrap that eats blood and grows huge and then eats people. And I think it was called Audrey.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that kind of stuck with me as a metaphor, basically, for trying for too many things, becoming too greedy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say that's my favorite flower.
What would you say is your favorite animal?
So we had pet rats for a few years now. So I really like rats.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the unusual answer. Also, next year we are looking into getting a dog. So I'm also a dog person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably in the transition now from pets, from rats to dogs.
Of course. So. Any favorite authors?
Yeah, I mean, I don't read fictional stuff too much. So when I'm asked about authors, I usually talk about nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a few game design books that I like. For example, Tynan Sylvester, who made RimWorld, wrote a book called Designing Games, which is really good, I think. Then Theory of Fun by Rev Coster is like just a general good mindset to get in, I think, when you want to get into game design.
Mm-hmm.
But also adjacent to that, there's an ex-teacher called James Paul G. And he wrote a lot about learning in general and also social learning and discourse and stuff like that. And he also wrote one book, I think, and a few more articles about learning through games. And it's kind of refreshing because he's like looking at it from an outsider's perspective. Like, he got into games himself and played a lot of them, but he's not like been into games forever or something, or really knows all about the different genres and stuff. But he's looking at it more from like a teaching and learning perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think his stuff is also really valuable. Also, if you're making games and not just trying to use games for learning.
Right. Do you have any favorite developers? Which it sounds like your favorite authors might be your favorite developers.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, they're up there. So yeah, I thought about a few that you probably know, which are like Tom Francis, who made Gunpoint and Heat Signature, which I really thought was quite brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Blow made brilliant games. There's Zach Gage, which made me like Sudoku in the past year with his good Sudoku app,
Mm-hmm.
which was like really surprising because I'm not really into puzzles usually. So yeah, those are the big ones, probably know, but also wanted to mention a few smaller ones. One is Arnold Rauers. His studio is Tiny Touch Tales, and he made Card Crawl and Maze Machina recently, just really focused mobile strategy games that are really, really great and also polished. Then I want to mention Keith Bergen, who made Oro, which is one of my favorite games ever, which also started as a mobile game, now it's also on Steam. It's like a tactics roguelike kind of, but you don't hit monsters for damage, you push them around the board, so it's very focused on positioning.
Mm-hmm.
And also Brett Lowy, who is making games as Brain Good Games. and he made Militia, for example, or Solar Settlers, and he's like making these board gamey digital games that couldn't really be board games, but also feel like board games when you play them. And I also really like his stuff. So those are the more outside the box recommendations.
Do you have any favorite heroes or heroines in fiction or nonfiction? I'll also accept villains if you really have a hard time.
Not really villains. The topic of heroes is interesting because the traditional hero, like, almost I never care about them. Like, if you look at, I don't know, Harry Potter or something, he's like more kind of a tool to drive the plot forward and to be this tool of doing good things in the world, but he's not as much of a character that you think is interesting and develops and has its twists and stuff. So I think, to me, the most interesting heroes are usually those that don't want to be heroes, really, or are just struggling with things in different ways. Like, I thought of one of my favorite movies is Memento, for example, and it has this protagonist that has no short-term memory, and like, he's not a hero, and when you watch the whole movie, he's really not a hero, but he kind of is the hero of this movie, and he thinks he's a hero also, kind of himself. But there's this twist, and I guess if you watched the anime Death Note, Light Yagami is another example of like a twisted hero that really struggles more with being a hero than he really acts as a hero. Or if you want to talk non-fictional, there was this show called When They See Us, and it had this character of Corey Wise who really had a hard time and was convicted wrongfully and stuff, and then went on to be an activist and really became a real life hero out of that experience. But it's really all about the character development and the struggle, more than about, okay, there's this hero guy and he is always doing the good thing. So yeah, I think it's more interesting when there's more nuance to stuff.
Do you have any favorite painters or composers?
I'm not really into painting per se, so I thought of some game art that I really like, which is pretty much anything by Supergiant Games. Like, really blows my mind how good it looks, like Pyre or Hades or Transistor. And they managed to really like look awesome, but also be very clear visually. Like, you can really grasp everything that's going on. So that really is really impressive, I think. And in terms of composers, I think there are, of course, brilliant people like John Lennon, Elton John, Kurt Cobain, I don't know, everyone you know. But I happen to mostly listen to metal music. So I would say also like Metallica, James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich are among the greats for me, and Steve Harris of Iron Maiden. And I really appreciate a lot of the epicness and the riffs and melody flows that they put together.
It's unfortunate I'm not actually wearing my Metallica shirt right now. Um, so for the last question, do you have any special or peculiar talents?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it's super special, but I play the drums. I played in a metal band and actually composed like, I don't know, 100 or so gothic rock metal songs in the past. So yeah, that's one thing. I mean, talent is always a loaded term, I think, but I just got pretty deep into this whole composition thing and was working with composition software a lot for a while, and yeah, really had like a lot of output in my young adult life in that direction.
All right. Well, that is it for me. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think I said a lot of things. I just want to thank you for putting together this bundle and giving so many indie developers the opportunity to get seen a little bit more that usually don't get seen. And I think that's something really special in today's gaming world.
Yeah, no, it's had a better turnout than expected. And I'm glad to have been able to put this bundle together because it really is just, it's a good variety, but it's also just great quality overall.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very, you know, I do take some pride in how well this all has gone. Any, social links or things that you want to drop right before we end?
Yeah, so my Twitter is Ludokultur. That's LUDOKULTUR. And if you want to go to a website, you can go to cultureofplay.net, which just links to my personal website that has all my profiles and also a collection of my articles and games and everything you need to know.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for watching. Um, and I guess we'll just see you for the next time. So thanks so much. Bye, everybody.